Good morning. My name's Carol Wise, and on this beautiful day, I welcome you to the Laverne Church of the Brethren. We're a congregation that strives to be a faith community that practices love and justice for all people. An announcement: it's not too early to put November 6th and the Alternative Christmas Fair on your calendar if you happen to be in the area. This is an opportunity to learn about important service and social work that's being done, not only in our local community, but also throughout the world. And it's a chance to shift our holiday giving towards supporting this work. If you are an artist or craftsperson who would like to offer some of your work for this event, please contact the church office. You will be well received. Today is Indigenous Peoples Day, and as such, I invite you to open your hearts and minds to the wisdom, experience, history, and gifts of Indigenous people, not only here, but throughout the world. May our reflections and prayers today contribute to a kinder, more thoughtful, and just world. It is a joy to welcome to our church this morning Dr. Elaine Padilla from the University of Laverne. Dr. Padilla is an associate professor of philosophy and religion, Latinx, and Latin American studies. Following worship, she will be offering a formal session during the spiritual formation on the Tongva through the eyes of the Church of the Brethren, paying special attention to the founding years and exploring ways in which the Church of the Brethren served as both a bridge and a barrier to establishing positive relations with the Tongva people. Dr. Padilla has graciously offered to share some words during our worship service so that we all might have a sense of her valuable work and insight, and I welcome you.
Thank you so much for having invited me to be here today, and I'm a part of such a beautiful service. I am feeling pretty honored as well because of that. I began this task of looking at the archives that are at the University of La Verne in the Wilson Library, and I have to say that I developed a deep admiration for what you are, and as a congregation, how much impact you've had in society. I've looked at first I was just going everywhere and looking at as much as I could and getting to understand the church as a whole. And I noticed many of the causes that you got involved in, causes like voicing your discontent for the Vietnam War, becoming an ardent advocate for the civil rights of African Americans, speaking against Jim Crow laws in the United States. I also noticed the manner in which you early on promoted women's rights and spoke in favor of the visibility of the LGBTIQ community. I was also pleasantly just reading your the rallying support for the great boycotts of Cesar Chavez and attending breakfasts that were being held in Los Angeles, California, and also reading about your preservation of the Bonelli Park and having other pro-environmental and ecological, supporting these causes. So I want to say that my deep admiration for this congregation has continued to grow, even now as I was a part of this service. Because of that, then I had to look at how your congregation had evolved in tandem with the social, cultural, and political changes throughout its history, and particularly focusing on its foundational years, and then trying to see how this congregation would have developed that sense of justice, and what were the seeds that we could find in this development. Also because its heritage explicitly, and this is explicitly stated in your historical documents, and one has to look at the westward movement of the congregation, its roots in Pennsylvania, and then moving eastward to the Pomona Valley. Because of that, one has to interpret this ambiguity, the ambiguity that is inherent in early accounts of westward movement, territory expansion of the United States, and within a study of migrations in the United States. So additionally, one also has to look at the matter of southwestern territories, specifically the San Gabriel Valley, and how this valley had been inhabited by indigenous peoples and Spanish Mexican Americans. As a person who's one of my areas of interest is migrations and borders and coloniality and decoloniality, I began to look at that historical movement through those lenses as well. I'm also, of course, as my name would give it away, I'm Latina, and I am Catholic, and of Spanish descent. So you're gonna see those of you who attend my seminar or lecture or class are going to note that as well. So I bring in a lens and somewhat objective, but also subjective understanding of the material. This task also allowed me to unearth the tension that existed between the fulfillment of the congregation's call for justice and its call for fulfilling a divine promise during its pioneering period. In the denomination's root systems, as in the founding of the town of Lurtzburg, one can find entanglements of the denominational identity being forged congruently with sentiments of nationalism. This development of identity, because it was also viewed as fulfilling the biblical role of inhabiting a promised land, corresponded with the European ideal of manifesting a destiny of movement and expansion from east to west. So evidence also shows attempts at curbing this ideal. This is the tension that I saw as through the historical pageants of the Laverne College. Yet in seeking to forge an identity closely linked to its heritage, these efforts were insufficient in aiding processes of emergence of indigenous populations as actors with an authentic voice and subjectivity. For these reasons, I explore how the Church of the Brethren in Laverne, even when giving a voice to the indigenous presence in the San Gabriel Valley, mirrored also the political climate of its time. Despite its intentions to include the story of early settlers, its heritage was told from a vantage point of privilege and superiority over them. But this is not something different from many other efforts that were a part of our Christian movements, including the Catholic Church, no? So the critique is a critique that is also meant as a manner to show the seeds that were present, these seeds that, as we see evident today, were very much early on what could make manifest or what could grow in a more actualizing, materializing way later on in time. So what I find that was impressive about the project was that you actually began to give voice to the indigenous peoples early on in your history. Whether it was perfect or not perfect, that's for somebody else to judge, but that they were there is, at least to me, one of the reasons why I felt fascinated by this congregation. Thank you.
The scripture reading today is Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 1 and 2. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are about to enter and occupy, and clears away the many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations mightier and more numerous than you. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, then you must utterly destroy them. Make no covenant with them and show them no mercy.
You know, slightly more than half of the states in the United States derive their names from Native American languages. The state of Minnesota, for example, is named after the Dakota word for the Minnesota River. It is comprised of 2 words, mini, which means water, and soda, which means turbid. Other words for turbid include clouded, full of confusion, muddy or obscure. Interestingly, soda can also be interpreted as sky-tinted, which most marketers prefer because it tends to inspire visions of blue, clear freshness. It's also a reminder that different narratives and descriptions can emerge depending upon the choices that we make and the interpretations that we embrace. And so it is with history and memory and experience. The book of Deuteronomy, from which Talu read, is the final book of the Torah, the first 5 books in the Hebrew Scriptures. It begins with the Hebrew people encamped on the plains of Moab, overlooking the land of Canaan, preparing to enter their promised land. They have spent 40 long years in exile in the wilderness following their exodus from enslavement in Egypt, and it has been a very trying and contentious time. Now the promised land is in sight. And Moses, who has led the Israelites out of Egypt and through the wilderness, offers 3 distinct speeches to his people. It really is his farewell address, and I guess, like many leaders, when he's got the mic in hand, he just can't seem to stop himself. So Moses begins his first speech with the story of the time in the wilderness. He reminds his people of all that Yahweh, their God, has done for them, and of the importance of the sacred covenant that has been made between Yahweh and Israel. He exhorts his people to obey the law, to practice justice, and care for the most vulnerable, and to reject other gods, and to be loyal and to love their God, that they might live and prosper in this promised land. After 30 chapters, he ends his speeches with those beautiful and familiar words from Deuteronomy 30. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. But there's a very disturbing part of Moses' speech. In the name of God, he calls upon Israel to utterly destroy the people who are in the land of Canaan, this promised land. They are to show no mercy as they take the land. It is a call to genocide against the people there, the Hittites and the Amorites, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the Hivites and the Jebusites. The rationale is that by destroying these people and their culture, Israel will not be tempted to adopt any of their, quote, detestable religious ways. Beyond the obvious call for genocide, what makes this passage so difficult is also that the Exodus story, with its account of a God who leads an oppressed people out of bondage and into a promised land, this story has been such an inspirational model for many communities in their own struggles for liberation. As Robert Allen Warrior, a professor of American literature and culture at the University of Kansas and a member of the Osage Nation, notes, quote, the Exodus, with its picture of a God who takes the side of the oppressed and powerless, this has been a beacon of hope for many in despair. We think about many of the powerful African-American spirituals like Go Down Moses and Wade in the Water, and the very important work that has been done in Latin American-based communities, where this understanding of Yahweh, of God, as the liberator of the poor and the enslaved has shaped so many liberation narratives, giving strength and courage and comfort and hope. Dr. Warrior notes that in this story, as the Hebrew people move into their promised land to fulfill their dreams of safety and a new future, Yahweh the deliverer becomes Yahweh the conqueror. The oppressed become the oppressors as they move in to take what God has told them is rightfully theirs. For Dr. Warrior, the obvious people in the story for Native Americans to identify with are not the delivered Israelites, but rather the Canaanites and the other nations, those who were already living in the land. It is a part of the Exodus story that is generally left untold, unmentioned. Now, most scholars agree that what happened in Israel in that early history is not what was commanded in the narrative. Genocide was not committed. The Canaanites were not systematically annihilated nor driven from the land. In fact, some biblical scholars note that the archaeological data suggests that the Israelite culture largely overlapped and, in fact, derived from Canaanite culture. But this reality of history does not change the fact that the narrative exists. The text remains, and it is powerful. Yahweh is the deliverer and the conqueror. In 1493, 1 year after Columbus discovered America, Pope Alexander VI issued the papal bull Inter Cetera. The document stated that any land not inhabited by Christians were available to be discovered and exploited by Christian rulers, and furthermore established the division of the undiscovered world for Spain and Portugal. It declared this doctrine of discovery that the Catholic faith and Christian religion were to be exalted and increased, and, quote, barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to the faith itself. This document became the basis of all European expansion into this new promised land of the Americas. Indeed, over 300 years later, in 1823, the United States Supreme Court held that, quote, the principle of discovery gave European nations an absolute right to New World lands. Led by the cross, blessed by the Christian church, the doctrine of discovery justified forced removals, conquest, forced conversions, and genocide upon indigenous peoples as Europeans claimed this land for themselves and their God. This narrative of promise and entitlement, what Katrina Friesen calls a warped quasi-Christian tenet of faith, remains deeply embedded in our American psyche, whether we like that or not. It's there when we talk about American exceptionalism or manifest destiny or make America great again, or our status as a city on a hill, or our designation as a chosen people, or the insistence that we be called a Christian nation. It is present in the dismissal of critical race theory and the censoring of books that center a non-white history. It asserts itself when we speak of Columbus as discovering America, and it is on full display when we assume that the land itself is something to be owned and ruthlessly exploited with no sacredness or integrity of its own. Isabel Wilkerson is an American journalist and author. In her fascinating book called Caste, she writes about her experience becoming the owner of an old house. A small welt that she noticed in the ceiling in a spare bedroom and chalked up as an idiosyncrasy of the house became a wave that broadened and began to bulge to the point where it demanded immediate attention and a costly repair. Wilkerson writes, "With an old house, the work is never done, and you don't expect it to be. America is an old house. We can never declare the work over. Wind, flood, drought, and human upheavals batter a structure that is already fighting whatever flaws were left unattended in the original foundation. Many people may rightly say, I had nothing to do with how this all started. I have nothing to do with the sins of the past. My ancestors never attacked indigenous people, never owned slaves. And yes, not one of us was here when this house was built. Our immediate ancestors may have had nothing to do with it, but here we are, the current occupants of a property with stress cracks and bowed walls and fissures built into the foundation. We are the heirs to whatever is right or wrong with it. We did not erect the uneven pillars or joists, but they are ours to deal with now. And any further deterioration is, in fact, on our hands. This call to vigilance and care is also true of our faith inheritance, including our sacred scriptures. Robert Allen Worrier suggests that keeping the Canaanites and those like them at the center of our interpretation and notice makes it more likely that we as Bible readers will see more than just what inspires or justifies us. He cites Holocaust survivor and scholar William Benjamin, who said, "There is no document of civilization which is not at the same time a document of barbarism." Worrier calls on us to take this insight seriously. It is those who know these texts who must speak the truth about what they contain, he writes. In other words, it is up to us to carefully examine and dismantle the doctrines and teachings and models and history that may have contributed to the denigration of others, that have justified violence and have denied us all a fullness of life together. Jesus frames it like this in the Gospel of Matthew. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road is easy that leads to destruction, and there are many who take it. For the gate is narrow and the road is hard that leads to life, and there are few who find it. With love to guide us, with faith to sustain us, with the wisdom of the Canaanites to challenge us, and with the care and determination of the Holy Spirit to empower us, may we together continue the journey on the road that leads to life for all people, for all creatures, for all lands. Amen.
Spirit, gates.